Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel Shruti Karen, and this will be my Instagram, and also this is going to be my email address. So if you'd like to share your comments or anything that you'd need, feel free to hop onto my Instagram, and also feel free to email me on my email address if you'd like to have a copy of my literature and English notes. So this is the second part of the previous video, which is a continuation. Given that the previous video was already exceeding the usual time limit of my YouTube videos, I decided to create a new video so that you all can keep track and make sure that you're not feeding in too much information into your brain and taking it easy step by step. So once you're ready, feel free to move on this video. So today we'll be looking through paper 2 problems. So if you looked at my previous video, we've talked about the paper 1 problems, and if you haven't watched that already, please hop on to the previous video to make sure that you have the knowledge of paper 1 before jumping into the more complicated one, which is paper 2. So paper 1, one of the major problems that people have is including unnecessary quotes. So usually questions are relatively more straightforward. However, it seems that candidates usually rely more on quotations, and this causes them to have generally unnecessary and repetitive quotes. So if you look through the past papers, or if you just do have some class practices, you'd be able to realize that sometimes you would needlessly quote too much, even though you know it's not relating to your point. And you need to understand that this is very similar to paper 1. Because in paper 1, when you're giving evidence as a plot, or you're using quotes, or you're just sharing a symbol, you have to make sure that it's related to your point. And when it's not related to your point, you are not going to get any marks for this. This is so important to understand that if you're writing unnecessarily at a greater amount of length, it's technically no use if there is no sense of understanding in your answer. I do agree that quantity and quality are equally important, but your first priority should always be your quality rather than your quantity. When your quality is good, it will not matter. It will not matter too much, even though the quantity is little. Number 2, always treat your ELIT paper 2 as your LS paper, because each type have a different approach. And while we go through in our journey of the Literature in English YouTube channel, I will go through them one by one. Of course, this will take some time. However, I do want you to understand that every question has their own different approach, and you need to make sure you don't have the same approach for every DSE paper 2 question type. Number 3, and one of the most important problems that people have, is organization. When you're doing your paper 2, of course you just have 2 hours, and the number of questions that you need to do is relatively quite a lot, even though there's only 3 questions, but then there are sub questions inside the big question. So organization becomes a very big problem for candidates, because they tend to have repetitive points, and while trying to answer the questions, it seems that students often have superfluous quotes and too much evidence, which is not necessary, which links back to the first point. But another major problem that people have is that they're trying to use their stream of consciousness. This is normal, and the only way to fix this is, of course, practice. I understand that when you're having your DSE exam, generally people would be very stressed, and they'd often follow their stream of consciousness rather than their 3 years of practice. This is normal, which is why I believe that it is very important to make sure you have a tutor with you, or to make sure you have a very supportive English literature teacher who can guide you through your process and your progress in your general English literature syllabus. So moving on, as you know, section B generally has the set poetries in paper 2. So we are discussing about paper 2 just in case you've sidetracked yourself. So paper 2 in section B, which is the set poetry, there are 4 major problems that people have. First of all is misinterpretation of the question. Now, this is very usual because, for example, let's say if they ask you to discuss the mood. Although the question asks you to discuss the mood, there are students who would discuss the tone instead, discuss the poetic techniques instead, or they would discuss about the themes instead. This is normal. However, you need to make sure that you're trying to differentiate the difference between a mood, a tone, a theme, a symbol, the plot, etc. and etc. You need to make sure that you're understanding what the question wants from you, because if you're not understanding the gist of the question, there's technically no point of doing the question, even though you're trying to complete it. Number 2 is, of course, lack of question word understanding. So it's important to have a bigger and sharper focus on the keywords. For example, if they ask you to comment on the treatment of nature, if they ask you to contrast, you need to know how you're going to tackle all these different type of questions. Are you going to compare them? Are you going to contrast them? Or are you just going to talk about one single poem, poem A, and maybe you're going to talk about poem B? You need to understand what the question is asking you and what poem are they referring to. Number 3 is identifying the specific technique. Now, it is so important to understand the technique. So many candidates in their sample answers of level 2, level 3, and also level 4 sometimes, well not always, but sometimes, they would consider ing suffix as a technique. They would consider the word if as a technique. And they would consider quotes as a technique. Now that is a very big problem because these are not techniques. It's a big no. If you're trying to emphasize on those things as your techniques, that is a very big problem. And also, if you're trying to say that imagery is a technique, that is also a very big problem. And I will explain why. When you're talking about imagery, technically you are not wrong, but you need to be very specific. Are you talking about visual imagery? Are you talking about auditory imagery? Or perhaps gustatory imagery? You need to be very specific. I understand this is DSE and it's not like your GCE or your A levels, but you need to make sure that you're giving the specificalities to make sure that you are aiming for the right grade and you're not doing something that is not correct. Number 2 is you need to understand that ing suffix, the if repetition words, and quotes are not a technique. Of course, if you say repetition, that is a technique. But if you're saying the word if itself is a technique, that is not true. You need to be very clear on what is your poetic techniques. And I would highly advise you to purchase one of my literature and English booklets where you would be able to gain all the poetic techniques all in one. And again, email me on my email address if you'd like to purchase one. Nevertheless, if you choose not to purchase one, I'm sure there's lots of resources online which you can look for and you'd be able to gain a whole bank of poetic devices. Mind you, this is only for the top grades. I'm sure that you'd be able to retain your, let's say your Form 1s and Form 2 knowledge where you must know what is a simile, a metaphor, personification, etc. and etc. Okay, and then number 4 is the problem of repeating the poetic devices. Now, even though if you know all the poetic devices that you'd need for your DSE examination and you know how to use and ace them properly, the biggest problem is that people use it repetitively. Do not use it repetitively because that's not going to show the markers that, wow, you've got so much knowledge. That is not how it works. Please, please, please make sure that you're using the right amount of techniques at one time. Lastly, before I finish off for today, don't forget to check out my literature in English booklet, which I've mentioned just a few seconds ago. If you'd like to gain a copy, please email me on my email address. If you'd like to gain a quick sneak peek on what is inside this booklet, please hop on to my previous videos and I'm sure you'll be able to gain a whole insight on what the book has and how this will help you for your examination. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram to share your comments, gain the latest updates on the DSE exam, and Again, don't forget to subscribe, click the like icon button, and follow the ritual as I normally say. Share your comments in the comment box below, give a like to this video, and share it with all your friends who is studying the literature in English syllabus. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And that's it from me. Thank you, everybody.